An explosive encounter when meeting my daughter's in-laws. My daughter's fiancé introduced me as a nobody, but when his father looked at me, he turned pale and said to his son, "Do you want to go to jail?" My daughter's fiancé was speechless with shock. Betrayal and justice collide. One truth will ruin the evening, the wedding, and someone's future. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. Dad, I'm getting married. The Chicago Tribune slipped from my hands, landing with a soft thud on the hardwood floor beside my leather armchair. Lydia stood near the fireplace, her fingers twisting something that caught the lamplight. A diamond ring I'd never seen before. "To whom?" I managed, my voice steadier than I felt. "I don't even know this guy." She shifted her weight, the ring spinning around her finger like a nervous habit already formed. "His name is Brian Harper. And yes, you're right, you don't know him yet." Yet, as if that made the situation better, rather than infinitely worse, I folded the newspaper with deliberate precision, buying myself a moment to process. Lydia wore her navy business suit, the one she saved for important client meetings. She'd planned this conversation, chosen her armor carefully. "How long have you two been together?" I asked, though something in her fidgeting already suggested an answer I wouldn't like. 2 weeks. The words tumbled out quickly, defensively. "But Dad, it's real love. I know how that sounds, but—" 2 weeks? I stood up, my reading glasses sliding down my nose. "Lydia, people don't get engaged after 2 weeks. They barely know each other's middle names after 2 weeks." She stepped closer to the fireplace, her hand gripping the mantelpiece. Family photos stared down at us. Lydia's graduation, camping trips, birthdays, moments that had taken decades to build, now apparently outweighed by 14 days with a stranger. "You always do this?" she said, her voice rising. "You analyze everything like it's a court case. Not everything needs to be cross-examined, Dad." "When my daughter announces she's marrying someone I've never met, yes, it does." The ring caught the light again as she gestured emphatically. Round cut, maybe 2 carats, set in white gold. Expensive. Too expensive for someone she'd known for 2 weeks. Unless he was either wealthy or reckless with money. "Brian makes me happy," she continued. "Happier than I've been in years. Isn't that enough?" "Happy is good. Marriage is permanent." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Nothing's permanent anymore, Dad. You of all people should know that." The reference stung. My divorce from her mother 8 years ago. Fair point. Poorly timed. "That's exactly why you shouldn't rush into Into what? Love? A chance at something real?" She grabbed her purse from the side table, a clear signal she was preparing to leave. "You want to control every aspect of my life, just like you controlled every case that crossed your desk. I want to protect you." "From what? From being happy?" The silence stretched between us, filled only by the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Through the slightly open windows, I could hear the distant hum of evening traffic, neighbors returning home from their predictable lives. Lydia's shoulders sagged slightly. "Look, I didn't come here to fight. I came to share good news and ask if you'd like to meet him." "Of course, I want to meet him." The prosecutor in me added silently, "I want to know everything about him." "Good." She adjusted her purse strap, then twisted the ring again. "We could have dinner somewhere nice. Tomorrow's too soon, but maybe Monday." Monday gave me the weekend to think, to prepare questions. "Where were you thinking?" "The Capitol Grill downtown, 7 o'clock?" An expensive choice. Either she was trying to impress me, or he was the type who expected expensive restaurants. "I'll make the reservation," I said. She nodded, some of the tension leaving her posture. "You'll like him, Dad. He's confident, successful, ambitious." Confident, successful, ambitious, and engaged to my daughter after 2 weeks. In my experience, men who moved that fast were usually running from something, or towards something that couldn't wait. "I'm sure I will," I lied smoothly. She moved toward the front door, her heels clicking against the hardwood. "Brian's excited to meet you too. He's heard so much about you." That stopped me cold. "What exactly has he heard?" "Just that you're my dad, that you're retired now, enjoying the quiet life." She paused at the door, her hand on the brass handle. "I didn't mention what you used to do. Figured that could come up naturally." Smart girl. She knew as well as I did. That former state prosecutor changed how people acted around me. Some became overly careful, others overly casual. But everyone changed. "See you Monday then," she said, opening the door. Cool September air drifted in, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the promise of winter. She stepped onto the porch, then turned back. "Dad, try to give him a chance, please." I nodded, though we both knew giving him a chance and investigating him thoroughly weren't mutually exclusive in my world. The door closed with a soft click, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a very expensive dinner reservation to make. Saturday morning found me in my home office, coffee growing cold in my favorite mug, while I stared at the gallery of family photos covering the far wall. There was Lydia at 7, gap-toothed and proud with her first swimming trophy. 16, rolling her eyes at my camera during her junior prom. 25, raising a champagne glass at her promotion party. Nowhere in those pictures was a Brian Harper. I'd spent a restless night turning over our conversation, analyzing her words like evidence in a case file. 2 weeks. The timeline bothered me more than I'd admitted. In my 30 years as a prosecutor, I'd learned to trust my instincts about people who move too fast. The notebook on my desk contained 3 lines of information. Brian Harper works in tech, IT, engaged to Lydia after 2 weeks. Pathetically little data for someone about to become my son-in-law. My phone rang at exactly 10:02. Dad? Lydia's voice sounded smaller than it had last night, less certain. I wanted to call and apologize for getting defensive. No need to apologize for defending someone you care about. I settled back in my desk chair, looking out the window at Mrs. Patterson, walking her ancient retriever. Normal Saturday morning routines, the kind Lydia used to be part of before she moved downtown. I know this seems sudden, she continued. I know how it looks from your perspective. How does it look from yours? A pause, like the best thing that's ever happened to me. The conviction in her voice was real, which somehow made it worse. True believers were the hardest to reason with. Tell me about him, I said, picking up my pen. What does he do in tech? He's a project manager at a software company, IT solutions for businesses. She was warming up now, eager to sell me on Brian's virtues. He's really smart, Dad, and funny. He makes me laugh every day. I wrote IT project manager in my notebook, though the description was vague enough to mean almost anything. What's his background? Family? His parents live in the suburbs too, Lincoln Park area. His dad's retired police. Actually, you two might have things in common. Retired police. That was interesting. Law enforcement families usually raise children who either rebelled against authority or embraced it completely. Given Brian's rush to marriage, I was betting on the former. And his last name is Harper. Harper? Yes, Brian Harper. She spelled it out as if I might forget. His middle name's James, if you're keeping a file. Smart girl. She knew me too well. What made you say yes so quickly? I asked the question I'd been avoiding. Another pause, longer this time. Have you ever met someone and felt like you'd been waiting for them your whole life? Yes, I had. Her mother 34 years ago. That relationship had produced Lydia and lasted 18 years before imploding spectacularly. But pointing that out would only strengthen her resolve. I have, I said, instead. Then you understand. Brian and I just fit together like puzzle pieces. I looked at the photo of her college graduation again, remembering her speech about taking time to find herself, about not settling for anything less than perfect. That cautious young woman seemed very different from the one planning to marry a stranger. So, Monday night, I said, steering toward safer ground, 7 at the Capitol Grill. He's really looking forward to it. He wants to make a good impression. I'm sure he does. Dad, be nice. I'm always nice. She laughed, and for a moment, she sounded like the old Lydia. You're always polite. That's not the same thing. Fair point. Prosecutorial politeness could be more cutting than outright hostility. I'll be on my best behavior, I promised. Thank you. And Dad, don't Google him beforehand. Give him a chance to introduce himself properly. The request surprised me. Why would you think I'd... Because I know you. Because you probably already have a notebook with his name in it. I looked down at the open notebook on my desk and felt a familiar stab of pride. My daughter knew me well. I'll see you Monday, I said, neither confirming nor denying her accusation. After hanging up, I dialed the Capitol Grill's reservation line. The hostess confirmed our table for 3 at 7 Hone Kwok, noting my preference for a quiet spot away from the main dining room traffic. Brian Harper, the name rolled around in my mind as I made my notes. Something about it seemed familiar, though I couldn't place where I might have encountered it. Probably nothing. Harper was a common enough surname, and in 30 years of prosecuting cases, I dealt with thousands of names. Still, the feeling nagged at me as I closed the notebook and headed downstairs to make a proper breakfast. 2 days until I met the man who wanted to marry my daughter. 2 days to prepare the right questions. The Capitol Grill buzzed with Monday evening energy, business dinners, client meetings, the soft clink of expensive glassware. I'd arrived 15 minutes early, claiming a corner table with a clear view of the entrance. Old habits from the courthouse. Always control your environment when possible. At 7:10, Lydia appeared in the doorway wearing a black dress I hadn't seen before. Her arm linked through that of a tall man in a charcoal suit. Even from across the room, I could see the confidence in his stride. The way he surveyed the restaurant like he owned it, Brian Harper, and the moment I saw his face, something clicked. A nagging sense of recognition I couldn't quite place. Somewhere, sometime, I'd seen those sharp features before. "Sorry we're late," Lydia said as they approached the table. "TFIC was murder." "No problem at all," I stood, extending my hand to Brian. "Mr. Harper, pleasure to meet you." His handshake was firm, almost aggressive. Mr. Willis, the pleasure's all mine. Lydia has told me so much about you. All good, I hope." "Oh, definitely." His smile was practiced, the kind I'd seen on defendants trying to charm their way out of trouble. "She says you're enjoying retirement. Must be nice to have all that time on your hands." We settled into our seats, Brian pulling out Lydia's chair with theatrical gallantry. The gesture was smooth, rehearsed like everything else about him. "What line of work are you in, Mr. Harper?" I asked as we reviewed our menus. "Various projects?" he said, not looking up from the wine list. Consulting mainly. Nothing too specific or exciting. You know how it is. Corporate solutions, business optimization, that sort of thing." Vague. Deliberately so. In my experience, people who couldn't describe their jobs clearly usually didn't have legitimate ones. And you, Mr. Willis Bryan, looked up from his menu, those familiar features arranged in polite interest. "What did you do before retirement?" "I was a prosecutor," I said simply, state's attorney's office. The change in his expression was subtle but unmistakable. A brief tightening around the eyes, a barely perceptible stiffening of his shoulders. Most people had one of two reactions to learning about my former profession: respect or nervousness. Brian's reaction fell squarely in the nervous category. "A prosecutor," he repeated, his smile now looking painted on. "That must have been intense work." "It had its moments." The waiter appeared, saving Brian from further comment. He ordered the most expensive steak on the menu, paired with a bottle of wine that costs more than most people spend on groceries in a week. I chose the salmon, noting the way his eyebrows lifted slightly at my modest selection. "So, how did you two meet?" I asked once the waiter had left. Lydia launched into an animated story about a chance encounter at a coffee shop downtown, how Brian had offered to share his table during the lunch rush, how they'd talked for hours. She glowed as she spoke, her hand finding his across the white tablecloth. Brian listened with the expression of someone hearing a favorite song, nodding at all the right moments, but his eyes kept drifting back to me as if trying to solve a puzzle. "Lydia mentioned you have parents in the area," I said when her story concluded. "Lincoln Park," he confirmed. "Dad's retired police. Mom volunteers at the local church. Very traditional family setup. Law enforcement father, religious mother, and a son who couldn't give straight answers about his career." The contradictions were adding up. Our appetizers arrived, giving me a moment to study Brian more carefully. The expensive suit, the confident manner, the way he commanded attention, all designed to project success. But underneath the polish, I sensed something else. Anxiety, maybe? Or guilt? "You know," Brian said suddenly, cutting into his shrimp cocktail. "It's funny meeting you like this. I mean, here's Lydia with her successful career, her close family relationships." He gestured vaguely with his fork. "And then there's you, enjoying your golden years, all that empty space to fill." The insult landed with surgical precision. Empty space as if my entire existence had been reduced to killing time until death. Lydia's eyes widened. "Brian." "No, it's fine," I said, my voice carefully level. I felt the familiar prosecutor's calm settling over me, the ability to absorb attacks without flinching. Retirement does provide more flexibility in one's schedule. "Exactly." Brian smiled, pleased with himself must be liberating, not having any real responsibilities anymore. Another jab, this one designed to suggest I was irrelevant to Lydia's life. I caught my daughter's apologetic look and gave her the slightest nod. "Everything's fine, don't worry." But everything wasn't fine. In the span of 20 minutes, Brian Harper had revealed himself to be evasive about his work, nervous about my background, and comfortable insulting his future father-in-law. The recognition nagging at me grew stronger. I knew this face, knew those calculating eyes. "Tell me about your plans," I said, changing the subject before Lydia could scold her fiancé. "Have you set a date?" "Soon. Brian said, taking a large sip of wine. Life's too short to wait around, right? When you know, you know. How soon is soon? We're thinking November, Lydia said quickly. Small ceremony, close family only. 6 weeks away. The timeline was even more compressed than I'd thought. Our main courses arrived, and as the waiter set down Brian's $40 steak, he made a show of examining it with exaggerated satisfaction. Now this, Brian announced, cutting into his Wagyu with theatrical precision, is how a steak should look, perfectly marbled, properly aged. He glanced at my modest salmon portion with barely concealed disdain, though I suppose fish is lighter, better for the digestion at your age. The comment landed like a small slap. I gripped my napkin under the table, feeling the familiar tightness in my jaw that I'd learned to control during 30 years of cross-examinations. The salmon here is excellent, Lydia said quickly, shooting Brian a warning look that he completely ignored. Oh, I'm sure it is, Brian waved his fork dismissively. But there's something about a real piece of meat that just energizes you, keeps you sharp, active. He took another bite, chewing with obvious relish. Of course, that probably matters less when your most strenuous activity is reading the newspaper. I continued cutting my fish with methodical precision, each slice exactly the same thickness, old prosecutorial habit. When under attack, maintain routine, Brian. Lydia's voice carried a sharp edge now. Maybe we could talk about something else. What? We're just having a conversation here. He leaned back in his chair, expansive and loud enough that the couple at the neighboring table glanced over. I think it's great that your dad's found his, what do you call it? His groove in retirement. Very zen, very accepting of life's natural progression. Natural progression? As if I'd already shuffled off to some mental pasture. The wine was making Brian bolder. His voice carried across our section of the restaurant, drawing looks from other diners, professional types like myself, people who understood the value of discretion. Brian seemed oblivious to their disapproving glances. You know what I love about this generation? He gestured broadly with his wine glass. My generation. I mean, we don't accept limitations. We push boundaries. We innovate. He fixed me with what he probably thought was a friendly smile, not like the older generation, always talking about how things used to be, always living in the past. Dad, Lydia's voice was tight with embarrassment. Maybe we should. The past, Brian interrupted, his laughter too loud for the elegant dining room. That's where all the wisdom supposedly lives, right? Except the world moved on while you were busy collecting all that wisdom. He took another gulp of wine. Times are changing, Mr. Willis, and the older generation just can't keep up. The words hung in the air like smoke from a gun. Around us, conversations had grown quieter. Other diners were definitely watching now, sensing the tension at our table. I set down my fork with careful deliberation. Interesting perspective, I said quietly. But Brian wasn't finished. Emboldened by what he mistook for weakness, he pressed on. Don't get me wrong, I respect experience, but there comes a time when you have to step aside and let the people who actually understand the modern world take charge. He gestured between himself and Lydia. Let the next generation build something meaningful instead of just existing. Existing as if my 3 decades of public service, my conviction rate, my reputation, all of it amounted to simply taking up space. Lydia's face had gone pale. Brian, stop. Stop what? I'm just being honest. He laughed again. That braying sound that seemed designed to broadcast his dominance to the entire restaurant. Honesty is refreshing, don't you think, Mr. Willis? Better than pretending everything's fine. When really, you're just marking time. Until enough. The single word cut through his monologue like a blade. Brian's mouth snapped shut, something in my tone finally penetrating his wine-fueled arrogance. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Even the ambient noise of silverware and conversation had dimmed, as if the other patrons sensed that something significant had just shifted at our table. I folded my napkin with the same methodical precision I'd used to organize case files, placed it beside my plate, and looked directly at Brian Harper. Really looked at him with the full weight of every courtroom victory, every conviction, every criminal I'd put away. Lydia, I said, my voice calm but carrying an authority that made Brian's eyes widen slightly. Would you mind stepping outside with me for a moment? Brian blinked, confusion replacing the smug confidence that had dominated his features moments before. Outside? But we haven't finished, Évariste. The grown-ups need to talk, I said, still looking at Lydia. The insult was deliberate, precise, delivered with the same surgical accuracy Brian had been using on me all evening. His face flushed red, but for once he seemed at a loss for words. Lydia's hands trembled slightly as she placed her napkin on the table. Dad, I don't think... Please. Something in my tone made her nod. We stood together, leaving Brian sitting alone at the table with his expensive steak growing cold and the eyes of nearby diners still fixed on our drama. The walk through the restaurant felt endless. Past tables of professionals who pretended not to stare, past waiters who stepped aside with knowing looks, past the hostess who smiled tightly as we approached the door. The cool September evening air hit us like a physical relief after the suffocating tension inside. The parking lot was dimly lit, shadows stretching between expensive cars. Downtown Chicago hummed around us, distant traffic, the occasional siren, the ordinary sounds of a Monday night in the city. We stopped between a BMW and a Mercedes, far enough from the restaurant entrance to speak freely. What was that? Lydia's voice shook with anger and embarrassment. What just happened in there? That was your fiancé showing his true colors. His true colors? She wheeled to face me, her heels clicking on the asphalt. You mean being nervous about meeting my father for the first time? You mean trying to make conversation and maybe having a little too much wine? Lydia, that man just spent 20 minutes insulting me to my face. He was trying to be friendly. You're the one who sat there like a judge, analyzing every word he said. The comparison stung because it was partially true. But 30 years of reading people, of sorting truth from lies, of protecting the innocent from predators, that didn't just switch off because I'd traded my prosecutor's badge for a retirement watch. I don't like him, I said simply. You don't like him? Lydia's laugh was sharp, bitter. You've decided you don't like the man I'm going to marry after one dinner, after watching him disrespect you, disrespect me, and lie about everything from his job to his intentions. Lie about what? What lies, Dad? IT consulting, various projects. Lydia, the man can't give a straight answer about what he does for work. Not everyone needs to interrogate people for a living. The words hit harder than any of Brian's insults. I felt something crack inside my chest, the careful distance I'd been maintaining suddenly collapsing. Is that what you think I did? Interrogate people? Didn't you? Tears were forming in her eyes now, but her voice remained steady. Isn't that exactly what you're doing right now? Putting my boyfriend on trial because he doesn't measure up to your standards. Your fiancé, and my standards include basic respect and honesty. Your standards include control. The tears were flowing now, but her anger blazed brighter. You can't stand that I'm independent. You can't stand that I made a choice without consulting you first. This isn't about independence. Then what is it about, really? She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you can't handle the fact that your little girl grew up and doesn't need Daddy's permission anymore. The parking lot fell silent, except for our breathing and the distant sound of traffic. A light rain had started misting the streetlights and creating halos around the few cars still moving through downtown. I love him, Dad. Her voice cracked on the words. For the first time in my life, I found someone who makes me feel complete. And instead of being happy for me, you're trying to tear it apart. Lydia, no. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her carefully applied makeup. I'm 32 years old. I don't need you to protect me from my own decisions, even when those decisions are mistakes. Even then. She fumbled in her purse for her car keys, her hands shaking. Especially then. The rain was getting heavier now, droplets catching the light as they fell between us. I watched my daughter, this fierce, brilliant woman I'd raised, preparing to walk away from me for a man who'd spent the evening treating both of us like jokes. Liddy, please just listen. I'm done listening. She found her keys, clicking the remote until her sedan's lights flashed in response. I'm done with your suspicions and your interrogations and your need to control every aspect of my life. I'm trying to protect you. From what? From being happy? She opened her car door, then turned back to face me one last time. You know what, Dad? For someone who spent his whole career fighting for justice, you sure don't trust people to make their own choices. The car door slammed with a finality that echoed off the surrounding buildings. I stood in the growing rain, watching my daughter's taillights disappear into the Chicago night, leaving me alone with the weight of every word I should have said differently. My phone felt heavy in my jacket pocket, but I didn't reach for it. Not yet. Inside the restaurant, Brian Harper was probably finishing his steak, probably already spinning the story of how Lydia's controlling father had ruined their perfect evening. And maybe for the first time in my life, the prosecutor had gotten it completely wrong. The coffee maker gurgled to life at 6:30 a.m., 2 hours earlier than my usual routine. I'd given up on sleep around 4 after spending the night replaying every word of our argument, every moment when I could have chosen differently. My reflection in the kitchen window looked older than it had yesterday, Still wearing the wrinkled dress shirt from dinner, I resembled exactly what Brian Harper had accused me of being. A tired old man living in the past. The first cup of coffee burned my tongue. I barely noticed. By 8 o'clock, I was pacing circuits through my house, phone in hand, thumb hovering over Lydia's contact. The family photos lining the hallway seemed to mock me. Lydia at 5, gap-toothed and trusting. Lydia at 16, rolling her eyes, but still letting me drive her to prom. Lydia at 25, hugging me at her college graduation. When had I become the enemy in her story? The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. Her voice, bright and professional. "You've reached Lydia Willis. Please leave a message, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible." I hung up without speaking. 10 minutes later, I tried again. Same result. This time, I forced myself to leave a message. "Lydia, it's Dad. Please call me back." The words sounded hollow, inadequate. 30 years of courtroom eloquence reduced to a stammered apology on an answering machine. I moved to my office, settling into the chair where I'd spent countless hours preparing cases, cross-examining witnesses in my mind, building arguments that could determine the course of someone's life. Now, I couldn't even construct a simple apology to my own daughter. The morning news droned from the television, but I wasn't watching. Instead, I stared at my phone, willing it to ring. When it didn't, I dialed her number again. "Lie, I'm sorry. I worry about you. Please forgive me." The second voicemail felt even more pathetic than the first. By noon, I'd called 6 times. The progression of my messages documented a steady deterioration from controlled concern to barely contained desperation. "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. I handled that badly. Lydia, please, I'm not trying to control your life. I'm trying to understand it. Maybe you're right. Maybe I don't trust people to make their own choices. But I trust you. I've always trusted you." Each unanswered call felt like a small death. I found myself checking my phone every few minutes, making sure the volume was turned up, that I hadn't missed her return call through some technological failure. The afternoon stretched endlessly. I made lunch but couldn't eat it, started reading a book but couldn't focus on the words, tried watching television but found myself staring at my phone instead of the screen. At 4:00, I began composing text messages I couldn't bring myself to send. "Lydia, I'm sorry about last night. Delete. Please call me when you get a chance. Delete. I love you. Delete." The cursor blinked at me accusingly from the empty message field. By 6 p.m., the silence had become unbearable. I called one more time, knowing she wouldn't answer, knowing I was probably making everything worse. "I love you, sweetheart. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. Just talk to me." The words came out broken, desperate, an old man pleading with his daughter's voicemail, reduced to begging for scraps of attention. I set the phone on my desk and stared out the window. The September sunset painted my yard in shades of gold and amber, the same colors that had filled Lydia's hair when she was small and would run to greet me at the front door every evening after work. Now she wouldn't even return my calls. The phone stayed silent through dinner, through the evening news, through my half-hearted attempt to read case files that no longer mattered. By 9:00, I was sitting in darkness, the phone charging on my nightstand, its screen black and unforgiving. Maybe Brian Harper had been right after all. Maybe I was just empty space, a relic from an earlier time when fathers were allowed to protect their daughters from obvious mistakes. Or maybe, for the first time in my professional life, I'd cross-examined the wrong person. "Tomorrow," I told myself, staring at the ceiling. "Tomorrow, she'll call back." But even as I thought it, I could hear the lie in those words. Lydia Willis had her mother's stubbornness and her father's pride. She wouldn't call back tomorrow, or the day after, or the day after that. I'd won my last case 30 years ago. This one, the only one that truly mattered, I'd lost before it ever began. 3 weeks into October, I'd perfected the art of invisible surveillance. Parked across from Brian's townhouse in Lincoln Park, engine running for warmth, I watched my daughter's morning routine through condensation-fogged windows. 7:45 a.m., always the same. Lydia emerged in her navy coat, coffee cup in hand, briefcase slung over her shoulder. She never looked toward my car. The first week after our fight, I'd been obvious about my attempts. Phone calls every few hours, flowers delivered to Brian's address, awkward visits where I'd ring the doorbell and wait on his expensive front steps. Brian had put a stop to that quickly enough. "Get lost, old man," he'd shouted from his doorway on a Tuesday morning, still in pajamas, his voice carrying across the gentrified neighborhood. "You're not welcome here." The neighbors had watched from their windows. Coffee cups paused halfway to their lips as I retreated to my sedan, with as much dignity as I could manage. Mrs. Patterson's retriever would have shown more backbone. October had arrived with its usual Chicago bluntness, cold mornings that turned your breath visible, leaves turning the color of old photographs. I'd spent most of it learning the geography of my daughter's new life, the coffee shop where she stopped on Wednesdays, the dry cleaner she used, the grocery store where we'd had our most painful encounter, Whole Foods on a Saturday afternoon, 2 weeks into my campaign of careful observation. I'd been selecting apples when I spotted her in the organic section, comparing prices on bell peppers with the focused attention she'd inherited from me. For a moment, watching her serious expression, I forgot we weren't speaking. Liddy. She looked up, and for an instant, her face brightened with automatic recognition. Then reality crashed back. The smile died, her shoulders tensed, and she abandoned her shopping cart right there between the kale and the spinach. I followed her retreat through the store, past startled shoppers who probably thought I was some kind of stalker. By the time I reached the parking lot, her sedan was already pulling onto the street, leaving me standing next to a line of shopping carts with my single bag of apples. The security guard had approached me then, polite but firm. "Everything okay, sir?" "Just missed my daughter," I'd said, which was true in more ways than one. Now, watching her disappear into the morning traffic from my surveillance post, I wondered if this was what my professional targets had felt like. Observed, cataloged, reduced to patterns and routines. The irony wasn't lost on me. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop watching the house, or I call the cops." Brian, obviously. I started the car and drove away, but not before noting the time in my small notebook. 7:52 a.m. Lydia's commute took exactly 7 minutes from door to main thoroughfare. The afternoons were harder. Nothing to watch, nowhere to go, no legitimate reason to be in Lincoln Park. I'd taken to driving different routes through the city, past landmarks from Lydia's childhood, the park where I'd taught her to ride a bike, the ice cream shop where we'd celebrated her college acceptance, the courthouse where she'd occasionally met me for lunch during law school. All of it felt archaeological now, remnants of a relationship that might be permanently broken. The worst part was the voicemails, each one shorter than the last, my eloquence failing as the weeks accumulated. "Lydia, it's Dad. Day 14 of this. I'm not giving up." "Lydia, I saw Halloween decorations going up in your neighborhood. Remember when you dressed as a prosecutor for trick or treat? You wore my old briefcase and everything. I know you're getting married soon. I want to be there for you." By week 3, I'd stopped leaving messages altogether. The sound of her recorded voice had become too painful, too much of a reminder of what normal conversation used to feel like. The police officer had been surprisingly understanding when he'd approached my parked car on a Thursday evening. "Evening, sir. We had a report of suspicious activity." I'd shown him my driver's license, explained that I was waiting for someone who apparently wasn't coming. He was probably my age, maybe a few years younger, with the tired eyes of someone who'd seen enough domestic disputes to recognize the pattern. "Might want to try a different approach," he'd suggested, not unkindly. "Sometimes space is the only thing that works." Space. I had 40 years of space ahead of me, retirement stretching like an empty highway toward a horizon I didn't want to see. But I also had something else. Patience. 30 years of building cases, of waiting for the right moment, of understanding that justice sometimes took longer than anyone wanted. The wedding was scheduled for this Saturday, October 19th, 3 days away, according to the calendar on my kitchen wall, where I'd circled the date in red ink. Lydia still hadn't sent me an invitation. The crossword puzzle blurred in front of me as I struggled with 7 across. Reconciliation after conflict, 9 letters. The phone rang before I could solve it. Lydia's name on the caller ID made my heart skip in a way that probably wasn't healthy for a 65-year-old man. I answered before the second ring. "Dad?" Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered, uncertain. "It's Lydia." "Lyd." I set down my reading glasses, afraid this might be another dream. "I'm glad you called. The wedding is Saturday." The words came out in a rush. 3 days from now. I know this is short notice, but Brian's parents want to meet you. They insist on it. Actually, a family dinner before the ceremony. My chest tightened with a mixture of relief and terror. Of course, I'd be honored to meet them. "Really?" She sounded surprised, as if she'd been preparing for an argument. "Because they're very traditional. Brian's father especially. He has strong opinions about family obligations." "I understand." I was already reaching for a pen, ready to take notes. "When and where?" "Tomorrow night? Friday, at Brian's house. Our house. 7 o'clock. She paused, and I could hear office noise in the background. Phones ringing, conversations. She was calling from work, using her lunch break to rebuild the bridge we'd burned. "Dad, I need to ask you something." "Anything. Can you just be yourself?" Not the prosecutor version of yourself. Just my dad. The request stung, but I understood it. She was asking me not to interrogate her future in-laws, not to treat her fiancé like a defendant. She wanted the father who had taught her to ride a bike, not the man who had cross-examined murderers. I'll be on my best behavior, I promised. Thank you. Relief flooded her voice. And Dad, I'm sorry about everything I said in the parking lot. I was angry. And you don't need to apologize. I handled everything wrong from the beginning. No, you were trying to protect me. I know that. I've always known that. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the past month settling between us. I could hear her breathing, could picture her sitting at her desk downtown, probably twirling her hair the way she had as a child when she was nervous. So, Friday night, I said, steering us back to safer ground. Should I bring anything? Maybe flowers for Evelyn, Brian's mother. She loves orchids. And Dad, her voice grew softer. Thank you for agreeing to this. It means everything to me. There's nowhere else I'd rather be. After hanging up, I sat staring at the crossword puzzle. 7 across. Reconciliation after conflict. 9 letters. The answer came to me suddenly. Peacemaking. I filled in the letters with careful precision, then reached for my notebook. Tomorrow night's dinner would require preparation, strategy, the same methodical approach I'd used for important cases. But this time, the stakes weren't about justice or verdicts. This time, I was fighting for my daughter's future and my place in it. The moment the phone call ended, I was in motion. 30 years of case preparation had taught me that success lived in the details, in the careful orchestration of image, information, and intent. This dinner was no different, except the verdict would determine whether I remained part of my daughter's life. My closet revealed the wardrobe of a man who'd spent decades in courtrooms, conservative suits, understated ties, shoes polished to mirror brightness. But this wasn't a trial. I needed to project respectability without intimidation, authority without arrogance. I selected my charcoal suit, the one Lydia had complimented at her college graduation. Navy tie with subtle silver threads, trustworthy but not flashy. Black Oxfords recently resoled, the image of a retired professional who understood propriety. Thursday afternoon took me to the florist on Oak Park Avenue, where Mrs. Chen had been arranging flowers for 30 years. She listened to my explanation with the patience of someone accustomed to men fumbling through emotional territory. Orchids for the mother, she repeated, making notes. First meeting with future in-laws. Very important. She studied me over her reading glasses. White orchids, classic, respectful, not too expensive, not too cheap, perfect. And for the father, former police officer, you said? Maybe a bottle of wine, something appropriate for dinner hosts. She nodded approvingly. Wine shop 2 blocks down. Tell them Mrs. Chen sent you. They'll help you choose something suitable. The wine shop owner, a former prosecutor himself who'd retired 5 years before me, understood the mission immediately. We selected a mid-range California Cabernet, good enough to show respect, not so expensive as to seem like bribery. Friday morning brought the final preparations. I showered with unusual care, shaved twice to eliminate any shadow, trimmed nose hairs I'd ignored for weeks. The mirror reflected a man who looked like he was preparing for the most important performance of his life, which in many ways, he was. I practiced introductions while knotting my tie. Mr. Harper, Mrs. Harper, it's a pleasure to meet you. Firm handshake, eye contact, genuine smile. Thank you for welcoming me into your son's home. The flowers arrived at 4:02 exactly as promised. White orchids in an elegant arrangement, sophisticated but not ostentatious. Mrs. Chen had included a small card for building bridges. My notebook contained 3 pages of research and strategy. Brian's father, retired Chicago police officer, probably someone who valued directness, hierarchy, results. His mother, traditional values, church volunteer, focused on family stability. Both would be protective of their son. Suspicious of the father who'd caused a month-long rift, I couldn't afford another mistake. 6:15 p.m. found me standing in front of my hallway mirror, making final adjustments. The grandfather clock ticked steadily, marking the minutes until a dinner that could restore my relationship with Lydia or destroy it permanently. In my jacket pocket, my phone buzzed with a text from Lydia. Thank you for doing this, Dad. It means everything. I typed back quickly. See you soon, sweetheart. Then I picked up the orchids, collected the wine from my kitchen counter, and walked to my car. The October evening was crisp and clear. Chicago spread out before me in all its autumn glory. Time to meet the enemy, or with luck, my daughter's new family. The townhouse stood like a monument to new money, glass and steel rising 3 stories above Lincoln Park's tree-lined streets. I parked carefully between a BMW and a Tesla, checking my appearance one final time in the rearview mirror. The orchids sat pristine in their elegant arrangement, the wine bottle's label catching the streetlight. This was enemy territory, and I was walking in unarmed. Brian opened the door before I could ring the bell. his smile sharp as a prosecutor's cross-examination. Well, well, our distinguished retiree has arrived. Good evening, Brian. I extended the flowers. These are for your mother. He examined the orchids with theatrical interest, turning the arrangement like a judge, studying evidence. How thoughtful. Very traditional. Mom loves flowers, though she's more into exotic varieties these days. Still, she'll appreciate the gesture. The backhanded nature of his acceptance wasn't lost on me. Everything was a performance with this man, designed to establish dominance through subtle diminishment. And wine for your father, I offered the Cabernet. Ah, California. Brian's eyebrows lifted slightly. Dad's more of a bourbon man, but I'm sure he'll adapt. Come in, come in. Welcome to our home. Our home? The possessive pronoun hung in the air like cigarette smoke. The interior screamed expense without warmth. Minimalist furniture that cost more than most people's cars. Abstract art that looked like financial statements. Technology embedded in every surface. This wasn't a home. It was a showroom for success. Impressive, I said, because some response was required. Isn't it? Brian's chest puffed with proprietary pride. Everything's custom. That entertainment system alone costs more than most people make in 6 months. But when you're in high-level IT consulting, you learn to appreciate quality. Lydia emerged from what I assumed was the kitchen, wearing a black dress that made her look older, more sophisticated. Or maybe that was just the stress around her eyes. Dad. She kissed my cheek, her relief palpable. Thank you for coming. Wouldn't miss it for the world, sweetheart. Brian was already pouring drinks from a bar setup that belonged in a luxury hotel. Scotch, wine, or maybe something softer for the older generation. The older generation, again, with the age-based condescension, as if wisdom and experience were disabilities rather than achievements. Scotch is fine, I said. He handed me a crystal tumbler filled with what was undoubtedly premium liquor, then launched into another tour of his possessions. The sound system that could recreate Carnegie Hall, the kitchen appliances that cost more than some cars, the bathroom fixtures, imported from Italy. Brian, Lydia's voice carried a warning edge. Maybe Dad would like to sit down. Of course. Of course. Sorry, I get excited showing off the place. He gestured toward a leather sectional that probably cost more than my first car. Make yourself comfortable, Mr. Willis, though I suppose comfort is relative when you're used to simpler accommodations. Simpler accommodations. My Oak Park home, with its hardwood floors and built-in bookcases, its family photographs, and comfortable furniture, earned through 30 years of public service. Apparently, that qualified as poverty in Brian Harper's world. I'm quite comfortable. Thank you. Lydia perched on the edge of a chair, her wineglass trembling slightly in her hands. She was beginning to see what I'd been trying to tell her in that parking lot 5 weeks ago, that her fiancé was a man who measured worth in dollars and treated people like acquisitions. Brian settled into his chair like a king on his throne. Tomorrow's the big day. Hard to believe Lydia's finally ready to settle down. She's been so independent for so long. The word dripped with implications, that independence was somehow a flaw, a problem he'd solved by giving her a ring and a place in his expensive home. Independence is a virtue, I said quietly. I raised her to think for herself. Oh, absolutely. Though there comes a time when thinking for yourself becomes thinking for two, right? Marriage is about compromise, about letting the stronger partner lead. Letting the stronger partner lead. The mask was slipping, revealing the controlling nature underneath the expensive veneer. The doorbell rang, sharp and insistent. That'll be Mom and Dad, Brian said, rising with obvious anticipation. Time to meet the family. He strode toward the front door, and I caught Lydia's eye. She looked trapped, caught between loyalty and growing embarrassment, between love and the dawning realization that maybe her father had been right all along. You okay? I asked softly. She nodded, but her grip on the wineglass told a different story. Brian's voice carried from the hallway, loud and confident. Mom, Dad, perfect timing. Come meet the family. I stood straight in my tie and prepared to meet the people who had raised this arrogant young man. Whatever happened next, I'd conduct myself with the dignity Lydia deserved from her father, even if her fiancé had none. The front door opened with Brian's boisterous greeting echoing through the townhouse. There they are. Mom, Dad, come in, come in. Orrin Harper entered first. A compact, alert man with the observant eyes of someone who'd spent decades reading people and situations. Behind him, Evelyn Harper radiated the kind of warmth that made church volunteers successful. Her silver hair perfectly styled, her smile genuine and immediate. Brian's sweetheart. Evelyn's voice carried maternal affection as she embraced her son. Orrin's greeting was more restrained, the handshake of a man who measured words and gestures carefully. His eyes swept the room in a pattern I recognized. Old law enforcement habit, cataloging exits and occupants with professional thoroughness. When his gaze landed on me, standing beside the leather sectional with my scotch in hand. His entire demeanor shifted. The color drained from his face like water from a broken glass. "Mom, Dad," Brian announced with theatrical flourish, gesturing toward me with obvious pride. "Meet the empty space." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Lydia gasped. Evelyn's smile faltered. But Orrin Harper's reaction was seismic. His hand shot out to grab Brian's arm with the urgency of someone preventing a disaster. "Brian." His voice was sharp, commanding. "Kitchen, now." "Dad, what?" "Now." Orrin's tone brooked no argument, the voice of a man accustomed to being obeyed in crisis situations. They disappeared into the adjacent room, but the townhouse's open design made privacy impossible. Their urgent whispers carried clearly to where Evelyn, Lydia, and I stood in uncomfortable suspension. "Do you want to go to prison?" Orrin's voice was harsh with panic. "What are you talking about?" "That man, do you know who he is?" "He's just some retiree, Lydia's dad, lives on a pension, plays golf, reads newspapers. That's former Illinois State Prosecutor Jeff Willis." The words exploded from Orrin in a harsh whisper. "He sent half the criminals in this state behind bars." The silence that followed was absolute. But he said he was retired." Brian's voice had gone small, uncertain. "He is retired, but Jeff Willis doesn't stop being Jeff Willis just because he turned in his badge. That man has connections in every law enforcement agency from here to Washington. He could destroy you with a single phone call." "Destroy me? Why would he?" Brian's voice cracked as understanding began to dawn. "Because you just introduced the most respected prosecutor in Illinois history as empty space. You absolute fool." In the living room, Evelyn was making valiant attempts at normal conversation, her hostess training overriding the obvious crisis. "Lydia, dear, your dress is lovely, and Mr. Willis, it's so wonderful to finally meet you." "The pleasure is mine, Mrs. Harper." But my attention was fixed on the kitchen doorway, where father and son continued their urgent consultation. "He knows, doesn't he?" Brian's voice was barely audible now. "About Chicago, about the—" "If he doesn't know yet, he will by morning. Men like Jeff Willis don't forget faces, and they sure as hell don't forget cases." "What do I do?" "You grovel, you apologize, you pray to whatever power you believe in that he's here as a father, not a prosecutor, and you never ever insult him again." Insult him. The kitchen conversation ceased. Footsteps approached. Brian appeared first, his face pale as courthouse marble, followed by his father, whose expression suggested he was already calculating damage control. "Mr. Willis." Orrin stepped forward with the measured respect of a man addressing a superior officer. "I believe we may have met before, professionally." I nodded slowly, setting down my scotch with deliberate precision. "We may have, Officer Harper, though I suspect our connection is more recent than you think." Brian stood frozen in his expensive living room, the weight of his situation finally settling on his shoulders like a judge's robe. The confident young man who had spent weeks insulting and dismissing me had vanished, replaced by someone who finally understood exactly what, and whom, he was dealing with. Lydia looked between us, confusion and growing realization warring in her expression. The truth was about to come out. All of it. The silence stretched like a held breath until I decided to break it, with the calm authority I'd cultivated through 30 years of courtrooms. "Yes," I said, my voice carrying the weight of every conviction, every verdict, every criminal I'd put away. "I was the Illinois State Prosecutor for 15 years. Before that, Assistant Prosecutor for another 15. Brian's knees actually buckled slightly. He grabbed the back of a chair for support, but I continued, turning to address the room. "I'm retired now. I'm here tonight as Lydia's father. Nothing more. The past is the past." "Oh, my stars," Evelyn breathed, her hand fluttering to her chest. "All those cases in the newspapers, that was you." "Some of them," I said. "Yes, ma'am." Brian found his voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "Sir, Mr. Willis, I had no idea who you were. I acted completely inappropriately. I was disrespectful and rude, and—" His voice cracked. "I'm so sorry." The transformation was complete. The arrogant young man who had spent weeks calling me empty space and irrelevant now stood before me, understanding exactly how close to the edge of a cliff he'd been dancing. Lydia stared at me with new eyes. "Dad, you never told me. All these years I thought you were just— I mean, I knew you worked for the state, but I never saw the need to discuss old cases at home," I said gently. "Work was work, you were my daughter, those were separate worlds." "The Castellano family," Orrin said suddenly, recognition flooding his voice. "The municipal corruption cases in '98, the organized crime trials that ran for 3 years, that was you." I nodded. "You put away some of the most dangerous criminals this state ever saw," he continued, his voice filled with professional respect. "I worked security for 2 of those trials. never forgot the prosecutor who wouldn't be intimidated, wouldn't be bought, wouldn't back down. Brian was staring at me like I'd grown wings. All this time, all the things I said were said by someone who didn't know better, I replied, then turned to address the room. I suggest we move past this. Tomorrow is Lydia's wedding day. That's what matters now. Evelyn, bless her, stepped forward with the grace that had probably sustained her through 30 years of police wife dinners and family crises. Mr. Willis, would you do us the honor of joining us for dinner? I'd love to hear how you and Lydia's mother met. I'd be delighted. The next 2 hours transformed completely. Brian, humbled beyond recognition, asked genuine questions about legal procedure and justice. Orrin shared stories from his patrol days, speaking with the respect one professional shows another. Evelyn regaled us with tales of raising a police officer's son in Chicago, and Lydia watched it all with growing amazement, finally seeing her father, not as an overprotective retiree, but as the man who had spent 3 decades fighting for justice. During dessert, Brian stood with visible nervousness. I'd like to propose a toast, he said, his voice steady but humble. To Mr. Willis, who taught me tonight that respect isn't given based on what you think you know about someone. It's earned through character, integrity, and the wisdom to understand when you've been wrong. He raised his glass. To new beginnings, to family, and to the honor of learning from someone who has spent his life making the world safer for all of us. We drank, and in that moment I saw something I hadn't expected. Genuine remorse, real respect, and the possibility that perhaps Brian Harper might actually become worthy of my daughter after all. Later, as we prepared to leave, Lydia pulled me aside. Dad, she said softly, I'm sorry for everything I said in that parking lot, for not trusting your judgment, for not realizing who you really were. You knew exactly who I was, I replied. I was your father. That's the only identity that mattered. She hugged me then, and for the first time in 5 weeks, it felt like my daughter was back. As I drove home through the Chicago night, I reflected on justice in its many forms. Sometimes it came through courtrooms and verdicts. Sometimes it came through patience and the simple revelation of truth. Tonight, it had come through both. The wedding was tomorrow, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, I was looking forward to it. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.